If you've recently been appointed to a bank board of directors, you have assumed an enormously important responsibility. Banks form the backbone of our country's financial system, and a knowledgeable and engaged board is the cornerstone of a strong bank. If you're like most new directors, you probably come from outside the industry and have little knowledge about banking beyond your experiences as a commercial or retail customer. And if you've never served on a corporate board before, you may not fully understand your duties and responsibilities as a director. I'm Jack Milligan, Editor-in-Chief of Bank Director. In this board brief, part of Bank Director's online training series, I will outline some of the most important things that I believe new directors need to learn about banks and about corporate governance. I'll also make several specific recommendations that will help accelerate your learning curve. Your first year as a new bank director will be full of new experiences and new challenges, and hopefully your board has a formal onboarding process that will facilitate your integration into the affairs of the board. But even in that case, it will be incumbent upon you to learn as much as you can about this important and complex industry. If you are the owner of a local business that relies on its banking relationships, you will certainly have an opinion about what constitutes good customer service. You will also bring your own good judgment and life experience outside of banking to your new role, and that will be very valuable to the board. But to be an effective bank director, you will need to become a student of the industry. Good judgment isn't enough. There are certain things you will need to learn. While you shouldn't be expected to understand the industry as well as your bank's senior management team, directors do need to know the business of banking well enough to provide effective oversight. And the art of effective oversight includes knowing what questions to ask and when to ask them. There are a number of available resources to help you prepare for service on a bank board. My first suggestion is that you go through the extensive library of videos available to you in Bank Director's online training series. They cover a wide range of topics from the role of the board and function of various committees to specific issues like cybersecurity and managing interest rate risk, and will provide you with a useful introduction to many of the issues or activities you will encounter as a director. I would suggest you start by viewing the following videos in our online training series: Units 2A and 2B, which provide a broad perspective on regulation; Units 8A and 8B, which deal with different aspects of the Bank Secrecy Act; Unit 16, which provides an overview of regulatory compliance; and Unit 26, which focuses on fair lending regulation. Banking is a highly regulated industry, so take the time to understand its regulatory structure and the expectations of your bank's primary regulators, which will vary depending on whether it has a state or national charter. Nationally chartered banks are supervised by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. State chartered banks are overseen by their state of domicile and by either the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation or the Federal Reserve if they are members of the Federal Reserve System. Compliance with all state and federal regulations is extremely important, and the regulators will hold your board accountable for any serious violations, so it is not a responsibility to be taken lightly. The expectations that federal regulators have for banks are spelled out in two valuable reference works that are available in a digital format at no cost to you. The Comptroller of the Currency publishes the Director's Book, Role of Directors for National Banks and Federal Savings Associations, which can be downloaded in a digital format from the agency's website. This publication provides a broad overview of the board's role from a regulatory perspective. I would encourage you to read it thoroughly, even if your bank has a state charter, because state and federal regulators tend to have the same or similar expectations for directors at all banks and thrifts, and the information is very valuable. Another useful resource is Basics for Bank Directors, published by the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. This handbook provides important insight into various elements of bank safety and soundness and regulatory compliance. You can find this publication on the Kansas City Fed's website. And finally, I would direct you to our website at bankdirector.com, where you will find an extensive archive of articles about regulation. When you go to the website, click on the tab at the top of the screen that says Issues. You will then see a drop-down menu. Click on the tab that says Regulation. Banking regulations change frequently, and this is a good place to learn about new developments. Banking is very different from most other industries like manufacturing or retailing, and while yours is a governance rather than an operating role, you still need to understand how your bank works so you can engage constructively with the management team. During your first year, take the time to learn which drives your bank's profitability. What are its largest operations? Which business lines produce the most profits? Serving on the audit committee, if that opportunity is available to you, would provide a very powerful introduction to the inner workings of your bank because of the scope of the committee's responsibilities. As a financial business, banking is really a numbers game, so take the time to learn some of the metrics used by the industry to measure performance. Return on equity and return on assets are standard measurements of bank profitability and can be used to compare your bank's performance with others in its peer group. The efficiency ratio is calculated by dividing a bank's non-interest expense by its net income and is a basic measurement of productivity. Your bank's net interest margin is the difference between its cost of funds and what it makes from interest-earning assets like loans and securities. And a variety of regulatory capital ratios measure how much capital your bank has as a percentage of its asset base. As a general rule, the higher the ratio, the safer the bank. There are many other metrics and ratios that are standard indicators of bank performance, and you will need to become conversant with all of them. Early in your first year as a new director, I would suggest that you spend some time with your bank's CEO or Chief Financial Officer to review the institution's strategic plan and its various businesses and operations. Also, have them take you through an annual or quarterly earnings report to become familiar with the numbers. Because banking is a financial business and because financial assets are highly sensitive to a variety of market and economic factors, one of the board's most important responsibilities is to oversee the bank's risk profile. Compared to companies in most other industries, banks are highly leveraged. In the third quarter of 2019, according to the FDIC, the average equity to assets ratio for all insured depository institutions was 11.35%. This level of capitalization is actually high by historical standards, and yet even at this level, banks are highly leveraged. The advantage of financial leverage is it can amplify your gains. Of course, the disadvantage of leverage is that it can also amplify your losses. Here's another important data point. The industry's average net interest margin in third quarter 2019 was just 3.3%. While your bank's margin may actually be higher, banking today is a very competitive industry with tight profit margins. It is only because of leverage that most banks are able to thrive despite such narrow margins. When you put these two factors together, high leverage and tight margins, you are left with little room for error. Mistakes can magnify themselves very quickly in highly leveraged companies, and tight margins can make it difficult for them to earn their way out of problems. For this reason, risk management is one of the board's most important oversight responsibilities. Most banks derive the majority of their income from taking in deposits, making loans, and living off that spread. Bank boards typically focus their attention on credit and interest rate risk. Credit, because you want to limit losses as much as possible, and interest rates, because this determines your cost of funds, which is a lender's raw material. These are not the only risks the boards pay attention to. Other important exposures include cyber risk, regulatory compliance, and various forms of operational risk. In your first year as a director, take the time to understand your bank's risk profile and how that is being managed throughout the organization. If your bank has a chief risk officer, have them take you through the company's enterprise risk management program to understand how risk is defined and managed. For an introduction to general risk management concepts, I would recommend that you view the following units in our online training series. Units 3A and 3B, which provide a broad overview, Units 11 and 21 on cybersecurity, Unit 17 and 24 on interest rate risk, and Unit 23 on the elements of a strong credit culture. You will also find useful information on our website at bankdirector.com. Again, click on the Issues tab at the top of the page and then select the Risk tab from the drop-down menu. You can also find valuable information about the operations of the Audit and Risk Committees by clicking on the tab that says Committees and then selecting either the Risk or Audit tabs from the drop-down menu. Finally, as a bank services member, you can access guides that detail the responsibilities of various board-level committees, including Audit and Risk. You'll find those by clicking Member Services and then choosing the Board Structure Guidelines tab. If you've never served on a corporate board before, you will also need an introduction to some basic tenets of corporate governance. Your role as a director is to ensure that the company is being run in the best interests of its shareholders. Effective governance requires that boards and management teams work closely together in an environment of mutual respect while understanding that the board is ultimately responsible for the success or failure of the company. Corporate directors are governed by two common law principles, the duty of care and the duty of loyalty. The duty of care requires that you act in good faith and with a level of care that ordinary prudent persons would exercise in similar circumstances, and in a manner that the directors reasonably believe is in the bank's best interests. The duty of loyalty requires that directors exercise their powers in the best interests of the bank and its shareholders rather than in the director's own interests or in the interests of any other person. These two principles are important because directors can be sued for an alleged breach of their fiduciary responsibilities, and adhering carefully to the duty of care and the duty of loyalty is your first line of defense. It is understandable if at first you are reluctant to engage fully in board discussions until you feel more confident in your new role. But don't be afraid to ask questions if there's something you don't understand. It's quite possible that a more experienced director doesn't know the answer either, but is reluctant to ask. For an introduction to general corporate governance concepts, I would recommend that you view the following units in our online training series. Unit 1 on the role of the board, Units 6A and 6B, which cover the fundamentals of corporate governance, and Unit 10, which dives into a variety of governance best practices. You will also find useful information about the function of board-level governance committees on our website at bankdirector.com. Click on the tab at the top of the page that says Committees, and then select Governance from the drop-down menu. To review, I suggest you focus on the following in your first year as a bank director. Understand your role as a director. Learn your bank's business, including key metrics that will help you understand its financial performance, and understand how risks and regulations impact your bank. When you agreed to serve on a bank board, you took on an extremely important role. Our belief at Bank Director is that strong boards build strong banks, and strong boards rely on the commitment of each individual director. There will be much to learn during your first year as a bank director, and I hope this information will help speed up the learning process. Thank you for joining me for this board brief, part of Bank Director's online training series.